Live from New Delhi, you're watching DD India Live, India's voice to the world. I'm Anil Thomas. Coming up in the next 30 minutes. UN Chief Antonio Guterres says clear violation of humanitarian law in Gaza, condemns both the use of civilians as human shields and bombing of southern Gaza after an evacuation order. Israeli diplomats respond angrily to remarks made by Guterres. Republican Party lawmakers battle to choose another nominee as Tom Emmer, the third U.S. Speaker designate in as many weeks, drops out of the running to be the next Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives. Severe cyclonic storm Hamoon to hit Bangladesh coast today and intensify further. Well, today is International Artist Day, marking the birth anniversary of one of the most celebrated artists of the last century, Pablo Picasso. And in sports, Australia to take on Netherlands in the ICC Men's World Cup today. Well, first up, the latest on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Well, Israel's ambassador to the United Nations has called for the head of the UN to resign over his comments about the conflict in Gaza. In a tense meeting of the UN Security Council, Secretary General Antonio Guterres said Hamas attack on October 7th did not happen in a vacuum. In response, Israel said he was justifying terrorism. According to Gaza's Ministry of Health, more than 5,000 people have been killed in the Strip since 7th of October. Some 1,400 people have been killed in Israel, with more than 200 hostages still being held in Gaza. Sally Patterson reports from New York, where the United Nations is headquartered.
Addressing the United Nations Security Council, Secretary-General Antonio Guterres didn't mince his words. He said he had condemned unequivocally the, quote, horrifying and unprecedented acts of terror by Hamas in Israel. Nothing, he said, can justify the deliberate killing, injuring and kidnapping of civilians. He went on to say it is important to recognise the, quote, attacks by Hamas did not happen in a vacuum. He said the Palestinian people had been subjected to 56 years of occupation. Now, Israel's UN ambassador Gilad Erdan described Guterres' speech as shocking. And in a post on X, formerly known as Twitter, he called on him to immediately resign. His comments, Erdan said, constitute a, quote, justification for terrorism and murder. Israel's Foreign Minister Eli Cohen was in New York as well for the Security Council debate, but he said he'd cancelled his meeting with Guterres following the speech.
Saturday, October 7, will go down in history as nothing less than a brutal massacre. Saturday, October 7, is a wake-up call for the entire free world, a wake-up call against extremism and terror.
Meanwhile, member states called for de-escalation, with the United Kingdom warning attacks by Hezbollah on Israel's northern border and rising tensions in the West Bank could signal the wider region could become engulfed by war. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken was also in attendance, and he stressed there would be repercussions if the situation spiraled further. Now, concerns were also raised about the humanitarian crisis continuing to unfold in Gaza. Guterres said that while some supplies are now getting into the Strip, it is a drop of aid in an ocean of need.
Thankfully, some humanitarian relief is finally getting into Gaza, but it is a drop of aid in an ocean of need. In addition, our UN fuel supplies in Gaza will run out in a matter of days, and that would be another disaster. Without fuel, aid cannot be delivered, hospitals will not have power, and drinking water cannot be purified or even pumped.
UN fuel supplies will run out in a matter of days, he warned, calling that a disaster. Sally Patterson in New York, reporting for DD India.
Well, Israel's military said its jets struck Syrian army infrastructure and motor launchers early on Wednesday in what is described as a response to rocket launched from Syria towards Israel. The military said it had identified 2 rocket launchers from Syria that had landed in open areas late on Tuesday, and that it responded with artillery fire as the source of the launch. There was no immediate comment from Syria. Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim joined thousands of pro-Palestinian supporters in Kuala Lumpur to condemn Israeli strikes in Gaza. Malaysia has long been a vocal supporter of the Palestinian cause and has called for a 2-state solution to the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. The country does not have diplomatic relations with Israel. Calling for peace in Gaza, hundreds of Jordanians gathered outside the Al-Khalawti Mosque in Amman to show support for the people of Gaza on Tuesday. The protesters waved flags and chanted slogans. The World Health Organization called for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire to prevent food, medicines and fuel supplies from running out in Gaza. The United States appealed for a humanitarian pause in the Israel-Hamas war to allow safe deliveries of aid to civilians on Tuesday. White House National Security Council spokesman John Kirby said a ceasefire will benefit Hamas at this stage. Kirby described Israel's concerns as legitimate. Further, he added that no fuel has been delivered to Gaza amid concerns from Israel about a possibility of a diversion of fuel deliveries by Hamas. The United States is negotiating with Israel's neighboring Egypt and the UN to smoothen emergency deliveries into Gaza.
We want, as I said from the beginning, we want to see all measure of protection for civilians, and pauses in operation is a tool and a tactic that can do that for temporary periods of time. So does that mean that is not the same as saying a ceasefire? Again, right now, we believe a ceasefire benefits Hamas, a general ceasefire.
Well, after wrapping up his visit to Israel and the West Bank, French President Emmanuel Macron arrived in Amman, that's in Jordan, on Tuesday. The French president had also proposed international coalition fighting Islamic State in Iraq and Syria widen its scope to include the fight against the Palestinian militant group Hamas in Gaza during his visit to the Middle East. Macron also met with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Jerusalem. Earlier, French President Emmanuel Macron also met his Palestinian counterpart on Tuesday. During the meet, Macron said that the Hamas attack is also a disaster for the Palestinians. Macron met Abbas in Ramallah during the visit to the Middle East.
Je veux aussi rappeler ici l'épreuve que vivent les otages à Gaza.
The terrorist attack of Hamas on October 7 has been a tragedy for the Israeli. It's also a disaster for the Palestinians.
While Palestinian president called for a complete ceasefire and the opening of the permanent humanitarian corridors to allow entry of aid to enter the country during his talks with Macron.
At this time when our people are being subjected to a barbaric aggression by the Israeli war machine, We demand a complete ceasefire and the opening of permanent humanitarian corridors to allow entry of medical supplies and food, and to provide water, electricity, fuel, and other basic needs. We stress upon our rejection of the forced displacement of the Palestinians from their homes outside Palestine, whether from Gaza or the West Bank.
DD India correspondent Amritpal Singh joins us from Israel on the ground situation prevailing there. Good morning, Amrit. Israel has intensified its airstrikes inside the Gaza Strip, even as the diplomatic efforts are on to defuse the crisis. Where is the situation leading to?
That's right. It's day 19 of the conflict, and Israel has intensified its military campaigns, continues to fire targets inside the Gaza Strip. In fact, the Israeli Defense Forces say that last night itself they fired 400 targets within the Gaza Strip. Hamas officials are to be believed 700 people have died in the Gaza Strip in the last 2 days due to intensified airstrikes. But what Israel is doing is it's also the Israel Defense Forces and the Israel Air Force is dropping leaflets inside the Gaza Strip, asking people to move away because they will intensify their strikes, move towards the south. They say those who do not move will be treated as collaborators and they'll be responsible for their own deaths. Even while it does so, it's also throwing leaflets and audio messages, broadcasting audio messages inside the Gaza Strip, asking for specific information about where Hamas is holding the hostages, saying promising protection and money to the people living in Gaza. The Israeli Defense Forces are saying to get the hostages released. They see this as a measure of cooperation from the Gazan civilians. But the reports coming out of there, if they are to be believed, that's not cutting much ice because people are facing the brunt of the Israeli strikes. And also, Hamas, there is a certain amount of scare of the Hamas. So people, the civilian people are caught between the devil and the deep sea and are the worst sufferers in this. As far as international diplomacy goes, Emmanuel Macron was here yesterday. He met with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the President and stressed upon the need for he first of all, reiterated France's support for Israel, but said, and in fact went on to the extent of saying that the wider coalition against ISIS needs to now start working on Hamas, treating Hamas the same way as the world looks at ISIS. So clearly drawing a comparison between them. But he also said that the first objective is to get the hostages released and see how a civilian population of Palestine's suffering can be reduced. So really, pressurizing the Benjamin Netanyahu government to take measures to reduce civilian casualties while expressing his support with Israel. Now, interestingly, the UN chief statement yesterday saying that the Hamas attacks didn't happen in a vacuum has, ruffled feathers here, with Israel calling for the UN Secretary General to resign immediately, saying that he stands with terrorists. So that has put a spin. But the Western nations are pressurizing Benjamin Netanyahu not to go in for a ground assault, even as the demand for the Israeli forces going in and fighting Hamas grows by the day here.
Well, thank you, Amrit, for that update there from Israel. Well, still to come on DD India Live. The newly formed Thai government is mulling over buying a frigate instead of a Chinese submarine. The cyclone Hamoon has now intensified into a very severe cyclonic storm. And today is International Artists' Day, marking the birth anniversary of one of the most celebrated artists of the last century, Pablo Picasso.
crisis into opportunity, transforming ideas into action. Stories of real change. Tales of sustainable solution. This series is going to tell stories of such change makers. Watch Change Makers on DD India.
You're watching DD India Live. I am Anil Thomas. Well, dozens of young Crimea conscripts left for the start of their active duty in the Russian army on Tuesday. A ceremony was held at the assembly point in the city of Simferopol in the Russian-controlled Crimea. At least 130,000 new recruits were called up for statutory military service during the autumn draft campaign. A total of 2,000 men from Crimea are expected to join the ranks of the Russian army. All men in Russia are required to do a year-long military service or equivalent training while in higher education. Well, Hungary's foreign minister said that the country's parliament will make a sovereign decision regarding the ratification of Sweden's NATO bid. The minister gave the statement after speaking with his Turkish counterpart. The minister added that this will not change Hungary's position in any way. Sweden applied last year to join the defense alliance, but Turkey and Hungary have yet to approve their bid. The heart of American democracy remains in a state of paralysis after Tom Emmer, the third speaker designate in as many weeks, dropped out of the running to be the next speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives. Republican Party lawmakers are battling to choose another nominee with Congress lower chamber in stasis. Benji Haya has more.
Well, Tom Emmer, the chief whip, had enough support to be the nominee for the Republican Party to become Speaker of the House of Representatives, but things move fast in Washington. Within a couple of hours, his bid was practically on the verge of collapse, and then he'd pulled out. He didn't have the numbers ultimately to take the gavel. From the off, facing significant opposition, for dozens of his own colleagues and lawmakers deciding not to put their name against his, and even former President Donald Trump, who holds major sway in the Republican Party, coming out to say that voting for Emmer would be a tragic mistake. The Minnesota congressman was the man who voted to certify the 2020 election, a rebuke really towards Donald Trump, and it's unlikely that if he tried to bring the vote to become Speaker to the House floor that he would have won, given the fact that so many Trump allies would have stood against him. This caps a remarkable couple of weeks in Washington, with two other Speaker designates failing to reach the threshold after Kevin McCarthy, the former Speaker, was ousted from the role. And the timing of it is critical. In just a couple of weeks, the Congress behind me will face another impending government shutdown deadline. There are also crises evolving overseas, of course, with Israel and Ukraine fighting their respective wars and urging lawmakers in Congress to pass aid which would help them. Nothing can get approved or passed in Congress, really, until the lower chamber is operational, and that can't happen without a speaker elected. And so representatives will have to coalesce around somebody, anybody, and fill that vacant seat of power that many lawmakers call the worst job in America. Benji Haya in Washington, reporting for DD India.
Well, time now for some more stories making news from across the world. Dozens of US states are suing Meta Platforms and its Instagram unit, accusing them of fueling a youth mental health crisis by making their social media platforms addictive. 8 other US states and Washington, D.C. are filing similar lawsuits against Meta, bringing the total number of authorities taking action against the Menlo Park, California-based company
financial
to
industry
42.
is stagnant.
1 crew member died and 4 others are missing after 2 freighters collided in the North Sea off the coast of Germany, according to the Maritime Emergency Authority. The body has been recovered along with 2 surviving crew members. The ships collided at around 03 hours GMT, about 12 nautical miles southwest of Germany's Heligoland archipelago. Polish President Andrzej Duda held consultations with Donald Tusk, the leader of the largest liberal opposition grouping, Civic Coalition. Duda, who is an ally to the ruling Nationalist Law and Justice, is holding talks with all the parliamentary parties that won seats in the October 15th elections. The Hunger Games is set to open at a London theatre next year in the first live stage adaptation of the Susan Collins novels and a hugely successful film franchise. Irish playwright, screenwriter and director Conor McPherson has adapted the first book in Collins' young adult dystopian trilogy and the first film from the Lionsgate movie franchise.
Becoming prey. See how quickly we become predators?
It's been a year since UK's Prime Minister Rishi Sunak took over from his predecessor Liz Truss, whose radical economic policy crashed the pound and spooked the public and members of her own party alike. But a year on, polling suggests the current Prime Minister is not doing much better. Stuart Smith has more from London.
It was October 25th when Rishi Sunak promised his government would be defined by integrity, professionalism and accountability at every level, trying to draw a line under previous controversies. His attempts to calm the markets during his first month in charge after a volatile few months were largely successful, but the start of massive health worker strikes and the chaos that followed represented a first major challenge to his premiership. The new year brought success where prime ministers before him had struggled in the form of a post-Brexit deal with Brussels over the contentious issue of the UK-EU border in Northern Ireland, and the rest of 2023 brought some Conservative Party success in some local elections, but they've lost more seats than they've gained this year, and those results are doing nothing to allay fears that the Conservatives are on track for big losses come a general election. Independent pollsters at YouGov now put his popularity less than it was to begin with across all areas of policy. The biggest fall was in how much voters trusted him with the economy, and around 3/4 of people asked don't trust him on immigration, the health service, the cost of living crisis or housing, key areas expected to be at the centre of the next election. But when asked, respondents said they still preferred him to previous Prime Minister Liz Truss and the Prime Minister before her, Boris Johnson. The Conservative Party are thought to be waiting until the polls are more favourable before calling a vote, but they have to initiate an election before the end of January 2025, and there's no guarantee he or his party's popularity will increase before then. In London, Stuart Smith reporting for DD India.
Well, the newly formed Thai government is mulling over buying a frigate instead of a Chinese submarine. This comes as the Chinese manufacturer proposed to replace the German engines with Chinese-made equipment. Thailand has already paid an installment of about 200 million to China for the purchase of one of the 3 Yuan-class S-260 submarine with German-made diesel engines. But the deal was delayed as Germany banned the use of its engines for Chinese military exports. Well, let's take a look at other stories making news today. 2 Indian-American scientists, Ashok Gadgil and Shubhra Suresh, have been awarded the national medals in the field of science and technology by US President Joe Biden. Ashok Gadgil was awarded the National Medal of Technology and Innovations, and Shubhra Suresh was awarded the National Medal of Science.
Pioneering research across engineering.
The second meeting of the One Nation, One Election Committee under the chairmanship of former President Ramnath Kovind will take place in Delhi. The committee is formed to look into the feasibility of holding not only Lok Sabha and Assembly elections simultaneously, but also elections to municipalities and panchayats. International Kulu Dashera festival commenced with the traditional Rath Yatra of Lord Raghunath at the historic Rath Maidan in the Indian state of Himachal Pradesh. The festival will continue for 7 days till October 30th. Indian President Draupadi Murmu attended the celebrations of Dussehra festival at the Red Fort grounds in New Delhi. The festival marks the end of the 9-day festivities of Navratri, and the effigies of Ravan were set ablaze during the celebrations across the country to signify the triumph of good over evil. The cyclone Hamoon has now intensified into a very severe cyclonic storm. The Indian Weather Department said that the cyclone is likely to maintain its intensity for a few hours before making a landfall on the Bangladesh coast on Wednesday evening. The cyclonic storm has been named Hamoon by Iran. The coastal districts in Bangladesh have moved residents to safe shelters by Tuesday night. Cargo handling at Chattogram port and river transport in southern Bangladesh is also ordered to be suspended. And now let's take a look at what's in store in the ICC Cricket World Cup today. Well, Australia will play against the Netherlands in Delhi today. Well, Australia is making a comeback after 2 losses in the opening 2 matches. Australia bounced back to win the next 2 and now look in contention with the return of form of spinner Adam Zampa as a complete unit. International Artists' Day honors artists and the contributions they make towards society. The day also pays homage to one of the most celebrated artists of the last century, Pablo Picasso, as his birth anniversary. DD India's correspondent Kriti Vadera has more.
This year, UNESCO encouraged International Artists' Day by the theme Art is Good for Health, so as to promote the importance of art in our lives. Inspired by the Cubism art form of Picasso, Dr. Neerja Chandana Peters, a medical practitioner, left her 2 decades medical career to pursue her passion towards art as full-time artist. Her artistic journey is published in many prominent international journals and magazines. Being an Indian artist, you have abundant of international exposure also. So how many countries you have represented India?
I have been fortunate in representing India in 42 countries so far. Recently had a solo exhibition in United States of America, and I've exhibited in UK, in Turkey, Philippines, and many more countries. If it is your passion, then come what may, you must follow it.
Art became a form of meditation for her, as she found her language in spiritual heritage through abstract geometry. With the rich ethnicity of India, numerous Indian artists are leaving their artistic imprints on global canvas. With camera person Vishwabandhu, I'm Kriti Vadera, reporting from New Delhi for DD India.
Well, that's all in this edition of DD India Live, but let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. You can connect with us on Facebook, X and Instagram. We'll be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I am Anil Thomas. From all of us here in Delhi, thanks for watching DD India Live.